Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Broadcasting Without Borders panel, Players in the New Guard of Broadcasting, Branding, and Content Networks. We have a tremendously talented panel here for you this morning. You almost don't even need a moderator with these guys because they just love to talk about this stuff and dig into it, and they're all incredibly expert in this field, which is a field that defies definition. My name is Ann Greenberg. I'm best known for founding the world's largest metadata service, Gracenote, which is embedded in over 1 billion devices and handles over 20 billion requests for data a month. Metadata is something that most people don't think about, but it is one of the essential ingredients to making interactive entertainment and searchable content online happen. So I've been in this space for a really long time, trying to pursue what I call democratic cinema, and all of the companies here represent that in one way or another. Right now, we're in a race to control both eyeballs and attention. We're going to talk a lot about that and also about monetization. First, I want to introduce the panel to you, and we're going to start here to my left with Ted Miko, who's from Myriad. He has a really interesting company and technology, which, frankly, you have to see to really get how powerful this is. And so I'm going to have each of the panel members introduce themselves, and then Ted is going to show us a little bit about his company, and the rest will just talk. So thank you very much.
All right, so my name is Ted Miko. I am the global COO of Myriad, which is a video technology company that puts product and signage into premium video. So what we do is, as a content owner, we take all the pain out of branded integration. For the brand, we take all the risk out of running advertising campaigns. And now you can actually tune for reach and frequency your advertising campaign just as easily as you would buy spots outside the video. You can now buy spots inside the video. So we're taking all the friction out of this, and actually technology allows for concurrent of liquidity in the marketplace, which gives us scale. So the idea is this can be media planned in exactly the same way as you media plan everything else. Your out of home, your dots and your spots, or your 30-second spots. Now you can be in the video where everybody's attention is. So basically what we're doing is we're disrupting the sort of boundary. We're talking about boundaries. So we're disrupting the boundaries traditional boundaries between content and advertising.
What I love is it allows you to change your mind later as a content producer.
Absolutely, and you can localize it. You can change it again and again. You can change it for different windows of opportunity, different countries, different so you can geo-target. All that stuff can now be done. It puts everything back into the advertiser's control, and the content owners finally get another revenue stream, which everybody's been looking for, so they can make more content.
Right, so the revenue stream is something we're going to keep coming back to in this panel discussion, but for now I want you to be thinking about the plasticity of content itself, not just how it's served, but also how it's made so that it can change form later. So our next panelist is Oren, and Oren Katzeff is from Tastemade, and I'm going to let him introduce himself and what his company does.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Oren Katzeff, head of programming at Tastemade. So what I do is I help develop our original programming slate, and then work with partners and brands to very authentically and organically integrate them into the programming. And then I work with all of our partners to create content or to have our content sponsored. We're a global digital food network. So if you think about Scripps or Discovery at the dawn of cable about 20 years ago, they created amazing brands by meeting a niche demand for content on cable. We think that same opportunity exists today. It's just going to look very different. It's going to be across digital platforms. So to that end, we have a studio, we have a network, and we have a platform, 3 parts of our business. The studio is where we do a lot of in-house programming. The network is a group or 400 plus channels that roll up underneath the Tastemade umbrella. And our platform is our technology. We believe that a modern day media company needs to embrace technology. And so to that end, we have a Tastemade app. It's a digital studio in your hands, and it allows people to create what we call raves, not reviews, of their favorite restaurants, locations, hotels, everything, anything you have a taste for. We'll talk about that more on this panel. But at its core, we specialize in creating high quality, engaging, original content, and then teaming up with partners like Hyundai. We launched a show with them last week. Google, we launched a show with them a couple of days ago. Kraft, General Mills, Anheuser-Busch, Grey Goose, lots of brands that we work with in creating original content together.
So that's great. And I want to welcome Dan Weinstein from The Collective.
Hi, I'm Dan Weinstein. I'm the president of Collective Digital Studios, and we're sort of what YouTube refers to as a MCN or a multi-channel network, sort of preferred digital media company at this point, other than as opposed to multi-channel network. But we have about 700 or 800 creators that we represent. We do about a little over 1 billion views per month, primarily on the YouTube platform of premium content and premium talent. And we provide a lot of infrastructure, production, and monetization support for some of the sort of new stars of this medium. And it ranges from brand integrations and sourcing ancillary revenue opportunities to funding and producing content, and then migrating it to other distribution platforms, both in traditional and sort of digital media. We've financed and produced Video Game High School, and if anybody's seen all the billboards around LA in the last couple of weeks, that's our project, and Annoying Orange for Cartoon Network, and the Fred movies for Nickelodeon, etc.
Great. Thank you, and welcome Peter from Content & Co.
Hey, so I make things, I guess. I'm the executive producer at Content & Company, and I have a long history as a very traditional executive producer in television, film, and that kind of stuff. And at Content & Company, we really are kind of a solutions company, and our solution happens to be content. Our biggest client is Subway. So we've taken them, in the last 5 years we're going to our 4th season of a pretty well-rated show on Hulu called The 49ers. It's directed by Jamie Widows, who does 2.5 Men and a bunch of other stuff. And we just finished with a big YouTube group called Cimarelli. We did a 5-episode series this summer that did very well on YouTube. So that's kind of our emphasis right now is it's all pretty much scripted content that, brands are our partners. So, but at the end of the day, it's me out there kind of making it.
Great.
In the foxhole.
Great. And we have Tom Morgan from Net2 TV. And Tom has some really interesting approaches to what I would consider to be massively scalable production and distribution of over-the-top television.
Yeah, we're basically a curation and distribution company working with fairly well-known brands. We have 21 long-form channels. Sports Illustrated This Week in Time. We've historically worked with print brands, Time, Bonnier, Meredith. We take webisodes and turn them into long-form half-hour shows. We produce 3,100 long-form channels, including 250 that are under things like Better Homes and Gardens Television, This Week in Time, Cycle World, and we distribute on the OTT, fully ad-supported. I come out of a world of dynamic ad insertion, which is setting the world on fire over in the cable TV world. We build long-form ad-supported television, and we put it into Samsung, LG, Roku, and a variety of the OTT. And we curate very efficiently with our brand partners. And we produce our shows. We curate about $1,000 per episode is our cost of production and not production, but a curation. So long-form ad-supported television is our game.
Great. And welcome to Kudor Anos from Fullscreen, where he's the VP of Integrated Marketing and Promotions.
Thank you. Kudor Anos, oversee integrated marketing at Fullscreen. Fullscreen is one of the leading multi-channel networks, although today we like to consider ourselves more of a global youth media company. We're primarily focused on developing content creators and programming them across cross-platform experiences. Our business is built off talent management, technology, brand services, and content production.
Great. Well, one thing I'm going to try to do is to let the panel dig into this as deeply as they'd like to. And of course, you're going to find out that they truly are very experienced and experts in their field, and the devil is in the detail about how you crack this nut, which is a broadcasting paradigm where you have everything from a 6-second Vine to consumers devoting an entire weekend to watching a whole series and possibly more, many seasons of a series. And so how do you choose what the length of that content is? What is the best vehicle and what is the best platform for any particular given story that you want to tell? But in all of them, they have a common problem, which is since it's an exploding, the network is exploding with content, how do you get above the noise? And so I love to talk about my friend Nat Gallhaber from Claremont Capital came up with who coined the term the attention economy. And if you think about traditional television, what are we doing? We're monetizing an audience's attention by getting them to watch a television show so they happen to sit through a commercial. So that's the heart of what's been changing at this point, which is how do you recapture that audience's attention when upwards of 75% of them are looking at a different screen while they're watching television, whether it's their mobile phone or a laptop or a mobile device. So there's some strategies there. So my question for the panel is this product placement or is it placement within the product?
Ooh, I'll take that one. I think that in an attention economy, you have to be where people's attentions are. I think that the problem with there's an inherent problem with trying to build a business how you'd like people to behave as opposed to how they behave. So I think you have to just accept the fact that people are doing 1,000 different things, that maintaining people's attention for any length of time is incredibly difficult when they're paying bills, arguing, making tea. Obviously there's an awful lot of technology that allows you to ad skip now, but the most effective form of ad skipping is just turning your neck. Just turn, like you look away. People do, they look away. They've got 1,001 things to do. So that's the key problem for everybody. We help solve that problem at Myriad simply because we take the risk out of it. You don't there are thousands of companies vying for people's attention, and now you can just buy the ones that are succeeding. You don't actually have to gamble on, is this content going to succeed? Is it not? Is it going to get the eyeballs or not? You actually put it in, you are inserting an ad in exactly the same way as you'd insert a 30-second spot. And it takes the risk out of the business completely.
Well, there's some risk still because, of course, another subject I want to come back to, which all of the panelists talked to me about before the panel, which was this idea of authenticity in the 21st century and this particular audience. So I want to hear from the rest of the panel in regard to this, what Ted's doing with this powerful technology of reinserting advertisement into content that users already want, and what Peter's doing. And go ahead, Oren.
I'll jump in a minute. I think part of the answer to your question is that at its core, the way that we look at content creation is on its own, it's got to be a standalone, engaging, authentic piece of content. When you just look at it from start to finish, you have to engage the audience. You have to make sure that it's in your voice, that it's in your brand. You've amassed this audience for a reason. It's because they like you and they trust you. And so at its core, that any content you create has to have all that. And we look at that very closely. And another thing is we've got access to data. We know in any piece of content or any series we launch where the audience is most engaged, where they drop off. And we pay attention to that. So I think that at its core is one thing. When you then work with a partner to very authentically work them into a piece of content, then again, now you've got to understand what the brand theme is, how the brand thinks about being integrated, and you still have to marry that with your voice, with your style. And so to just give an example, we recently launched a series with Grey Goose called Local Flight, and Grey Goose's key initiatives were local ingredients and the notion of fly beyond, take something ordinary and make it extraordinary. And so the show concept we came up with, again, is this show called Local Flight, was a host who goes from city to city, gets a local ingredient in each city. So in San Francisco, it was chocolate. In LA, it was citrus. In Seattle, it was coffee beans. He then goes to a very cool bar, meets a mixologist, and challenges him or her to create a Grey Goose-inspired drink with that ingredient. So it's a fun show. The audience really got behind it. But I think what was most compelling about the feedback we got in the series was just pages and pages of people online saying the integration was thoughtful, the integration was great. Again, this is online where people are fickle, they're angry, they don't always leave the most positive comments. And those are actually very thoughtful comments, right? Actually saying, I know this was sponsored and I still enjoyed it, or I know this is sponsored and the integration was very smart, or it was great. We're in season 2 coming. So again, when you go back to what made it successful, it was authentic integration, and at its core, a standalone, enjoyable, shareable piece of content.
Okay.
I just want to add, like my old boss, Jimmy Irvin, used to say, what do you think an audience would prefer? A pair of headphones and a music video that is contextually relevant, and this is what it's really all about, contextual relevance, or being interrupted by 30 seconds of a lizard trying to sell you insurance. And so, and I think that that key distinction is important for the audience.
Well, contextually relevant means worldwide now. So how do you deal with the same problems in terms of localization for different countries as well?
Well, it's difficult, and I just wanted to play on sort of one, add on to, the last question, which is that, the audience is extremely savvy and incredibly discerning, and so tricking them into watching a paid placement or an endorsement or whatever the case may be, oftentimes isn't the way to go. And so what we try to navigate is, as cliche as it may sound, is the win-win-win scenario, which is brands need to get their message across. That's why they're paying for what they need for insertion into your content or whatever the case may be. There's a certain ROI that they expect, and it needs to happen. The content creator, is looking to make a living and looking to continue to develop their brand, and the audience is looking to engage with content that they're familiar with and that they like and that they feel supportive over. And so navigating that line between brand, content, and or content creator and talent and the audience is really the sweet spot of where I think it all comes together in this world, and it's not always the easiest thing to do. To your point, it is a global platform, and when you're looking at endorsement or brand integration, I don't know a way around it. I mean, there's geo-blocking, there's this, that, and the other thing, but you got to realize that the messages that you're creating are going to a global audience.
Well, and not only that, but coming from a global audience. So more and more, especially in the film world, we're seeing the fact that with China, that's opening so many more theaters, and all of ours are struggling here in the, well, not all of them, but many are struggling here in the U.S. Our industry, our U.S.-based industry, is trying to really please that market, and it is changing what gets developed, what gets greenlit, what gets written. And so I think that at the same way as we have audience access that's worldwide, we also have to think globally in terms of what we're greenlighting and how it will play in particular markets and how it can morph to meet those markets. Tom, why don't you talk a little bit about how one could scale that? I mean, that's a daunting proposal, right? We have hyper personalization or trying to create content to find its way to one viewer, right? And then we also need to create that content so that it works massively.
Yeah, the challenge for the brand advertiser right now is to engage in a relevant fashion in context of what the programming is about. Endemic advertisers are going to be the big winners, all clad in a cooking show at Taste Me or something like that. So, ABC right now is like 350 advertisers, whereas Google has 2 million. But the YouTube economy, 80% of the viewership is outside the United States, if you read the Jeffries report from 2 weeks ago. So from that standpoint, if you want to keep the advertiser in context in country, and where they're actually marketing a relevant product, then you got to work in vertical market areas where the ad system knows where the viewer is and what kind of context they're in and context. So you look, what you're going to start seeing is programming like the early days of the Food Network and things like that, where when Home and Garden TV was first started, Scripps had to create the shows, the ads for All-Clad, because they didn't have any television ads. They had print ads. Mm-hmm. So you're going to see more and more niche programming coming out of the MCNs or vertical market publishers that go where the cable guys have abandoned. I'm sorry, but Duck Dynasty, it's not arts and entertainment. That's where they've gone to a different place.
That's subjective.
So, I've got on my computer a very interesting, we're now on September 1st, 1980. I've got on my PC the first video production of MTV. And you want to look at it, it is a joke, but it's really interesting. It got into a vertical passion. So we're reinventing 1979 through 81 in television all over again with a lot of these vertical markets. That's the beauty of the MCNs, very passionate about a topic. So advertising, the consumer doesn't hate advertising, just look at Vogue magazine. The ads are relevant and engaging and contextually topical, where sometimes the person actually reads the ads before they read the article. Same thing in television. So it's really moving to let the ad system work with the programmer so it's dynamically inserted. It's not forced in, the textical hour, but it is relevant and seamless and appropriate.
Right.
All the research that we have bears that out exactly.
Yeah.
That when it's too obvious, or when it is like, oh, look, I'm drinking a bottle of Evian and it's forced,
yeah,
then the recall, the brand sentiment, and the intent to purchase numbers all go down. If it actually is perfectly contextual and you don't actually, you can just see it and it looks like it's always belonged there into that scene, then the numbers are striking. I mean, the numbers are really staggering. They're at least 2x what you'd get with any kind of advertising outside the content, which is, I guess, predictable. But I mean, that union, though, of content and brands is it's kind of like that teenage sex where, both parties have heard about it. It sounds really, really good, but neither party really know what the hell they're doing.
So,
That's still the case for me.
So if you're brave enough to venture into this area, how do you do it safely, right? And so I keep thinking, Ted, about what you're doing and the rest of you are doing in terms of creating products. Let's say you're actually giving people a way to monetize something that they have created, and you're almost, even though it's deeply integrated, it's a buffer because you can serve those ads, maybe not yet, but for that particular audience.
Absolutely. So we can localize, not right now, but in 6 months' time, we'll be able to personalize too. So that one person could be watching a Rihanna video with Snapple perfectly contextually integrated into it, and another person will be getting whatever, Diet Coke or.
And so, in a strange way, that's giving some freedom back to the creatives involved with the underlying show, because they don't have to worry so much about, like, I would never drink that drink. I'm not going to put it in my show. Drinking and eating, okay, that's not so political. But there are other places where it could get kind of crazy.
You have probably horror stories too. We all sort of bear some scars with doing this. That
I'd love to hear those stories, and I'm sure our audience would.
Just hideous, that $200,000 vodka integration, which was fantastic up until the point where at 2 p.m. the singer decided that she was a gin girl. And didn't want vodka anymore, and couldn't be seen with a bottle of vodka anywhere. And suddenly you saw that $200,000 fly out of the window. I have many, many stories like that. And so it's not just us. There will be technologies that allow this to happen in a much more scalable way than in the sort of, I don't want to say haphazard, but certainly in the the sort of hand-to-mouth way that these things have been done.
So user taste is important, right? Because we're the person who's viewing that piece of content. But, I think we can also talk about the differences between content creators and the audience, and, an audience where every content creator has a production studio in their pocket, in their smartphone. Now these models that we're talking about already require high levels of technology to actually get right becomes even more complicated. So I want to talk a little bit about consumers versus creators, and I will.
Can we just go back just
yeah, sure.
I think we do it a little differently, and it's the yin and yang of how you do it. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to make content and it's going to be brand supported, there's always going to be a brand that says, "Well, wait a second, what do I get to do? What is it?" And, with a client like Subway, they will always say, "Well, he's just standing there talking. Can he have a sandwich in his hand?" And you go, well, no, you can't. But that's the push and pull. And then you've got pre-roll, which, all of a sudden you go, well, before anybody sees the really cool stuff that we're doing, they have to get through a 30-second pre-roll of the same crap they're going to watch on television they don't want to watch. So how do you do that? So what we did was, Subway is an agency and probably 10 agencies, but we went to our show creators and said, if you're going to, here's the product that we're trying to sell. I'll take cookies as an example with Subway. And they said, oh, yeah, we want to do a 30-second spot with Subway about cookies. So we have a really wonderful actor, a guy named Moses Storm, who's in this show with the 49ers. And I said, what would you do if you were talking about cookies? And he put 2 cookies out in front of him. And he just did, in his character from the show, he just did this little speech to the cookies about how they loved each other and they loved the sandwiches. Well, it was so never going to be written by an agency or a client. But it came out of the brand of the show, and it was in situation, and it worked great. In fact, so well, Subway calls and said, well, we got a huge flight we're running on ABC Family. Can we run that spot? Well, then it's just a money thing, and you go, yeah.
Have you run into wait, hang on. Have you run into any of this, Cooter?
So I think it's really interesting what you're talking about, and it all kind of threads together over here. Really, at the end of the day, what I think we're tasked to do in this space with pretty much everyone up here, as we're working with brands and helping them them learn how to reach these audiences. It's an education game. We're here to educate brands on how to work with these new creators, this new wave of content, and educating creators on how and why to work with brands. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I think everyone needs each other on both sides of that world. And there's an authenticity, we go back to the authenticity aspect of it. And I think your Subway commercial or series for the 49ers really did this well, where you have to play into the format. So many times you have a brand that sees a format and they want to rewrite it for a commercial. But ultimately, what we want them to do is really embrace that format. We're dealing with old school agencies and old school mentalities for advertising that haven't really grasped onto how this new dynamic works between consumers and creators. But I think as they see the need that they need to be there and they get it. So for us, we just need to educate and kind of move them in there.
Right. And so that is actually a great bridge to what I wanted to talk about in terms of who is the consumer and who is the creator. This line is getting blurred heavily. And so I want to know if how much the panel is allowing their audience to be creative and have creative input, and if they actually take their content and change it in what would be considered a crazy short turnaround time to fit any comments, concerns, and or creativity of the crowd.
Well, yeah, I'll jump in there quickly. I mentioned earlier the platform part of our business or the technology. So again, we've got an app called Tastemade where you download it. You can create what we call raves. You click the create button and you get a storyboard, which kind of coaches you on what you need to film. So today it's mostly for restaurants. People are creating raves all over the world. And what we think is important about that is that never before has there been a time where consumers want to be as part of the creative process as they are today. They want to create content. And this device, this studio in their hand allows them to do that. And I think what's powerful about that from a Tastemade standpoint and from a programming standpoint is, every night or every morning we wake up and there are tons of videos being created all over the world. But from a programming standpoint, I can then work with those creators to create additional content. This almost becomes like our own little mini American Idol, where, again, I mentioned the show that we launched with Google a few days ago. It's called Day of Gluttony. And it's two hosts who arrive in a different city in each episode, and they have less than 24 hours to eat at 24 different restaurants. And they're guided by Google Now, and it's very authentic integration. But the point there is that we discovered that talent on the app. We discovered that talent as a consumer who became a creator, who now also has a YouTube channel, who now is also part of our studio.
Or why are you calling them raves and not craves?
It's not bad. Yeah, well, because it's a rave because they love it, but when you watch it, you will crave it. So I guess from a consumer standpoint, you might crave what you're seeing. So again, I think it's the technology that enables people to create, and then it's that creation that allows us to take that creator and program beyond just beyond the app.
I just want to say, there's been a profound shift in the way that content is both created and consumed, and yet by and large, the advertising around that content is still rooted in the 1950s. You talked about like a 30, an old school 30-second spot, and having, which it's the most irritating thing on earth is getting some really what you think might be a very cool thing from your Facebook feed, which is 34 seconds, and you have to sit through a walk across the 30-second broken glass before you get to your 34-second content. It's asinine, and I think that has to change.
Well,
at some point. Advertising has to catch up with.
So I'm going to jump in here and just ask the question. This will be sort of a controversial question: is if content, if everybody is competing with free because attention is so fickle, where do we get to a place where why do you need an advertisement in the first place if the content is
Because we haven't been able to figure out how to do free ad-supported television without ads.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of
there are only two forms of content created: the subscription content and ad-supported content.
So subscription is the next thing I would love to talk about, which is we just had an announcement from CBS and on the heels of one from HBO, which is that they are going to now offer their channels via subscription, and you don't have to be subscribing to your cable channel. So you have the great unbundling underway, the thing that we've been waiting for a very long time. I want Tom to pick this up and talk about that a bit. And
we've had this discussion before. When I worked for a year for Virgin, trying to build a virtual MSO, And what we were doing was trying to go after the people that fly Virgin America and that demographic and build programming as a pool around that demographic. The interesting thing about that demographic is that, for example, 71% of the people that fly that airline carry a passport. Well, in the United States, only 31% of the people have passports. But for those people, football is Premier League, not NFL. Well, good luck getting that as a separate license and breaking down and going back and demographically bundling a service versus geographically bundling a service. So as you see these things coming down, what you'll see is a reaggregation of programming based on psychographic or demographic models.
Affinity models.
Affinity models or gender models. Or I saw an amazing stat the other day that 78% of people that watch Univision only watch Univision because of a language bias. That's the only channel they watch because it's a demographic and ethnic, basically, programming mix. So I think you're going to start seeing not an a la carte, not breaking down even the $6 or the Dish PSS service or the Sony PlayStation service, but you will see things that say, this is my demographic pool of interest, where both the programming and advertising is appropriate for a specific type of viewer. And that's where it's going.
And that really transcends borders, which I really think is the heart and soul of this panel. Dan, Video Game High School is also testing the waters in terms of going direct to the consumer via Vimeo. And I know Kudo was interested in this. And why don't you speak to that a bit?
Sure. We've done a lot of interesting things with Video Game High School. It's for this ecosystem, sort of inarguably is a pretty high production value property that sort of is a moment in time programming, much more akin to television than the always on programming of some of the other YouTube content out there. And all 3 seasons we've done something different. First, the first season we bundled a movie together and we licensed it to Netflix, and we had some minor, sort of tertiary brand sponsors that were integrated very passively into the content. It overperformed on Netflix and some of the other platforms. And season 2, we were able to sell Dodge Dart a pretty sizable sponsorship of the entire season, where the car was a character in that season, integrated into the show. A lot of behind the scenes. Didn't shy away from the fact that Dodge was a sponsor and that they were enabling the content, and that without them, the production value would not have gone up the way that it did. And we also increased from 10-minute episodes to 30-minute episodes. And then season 3, we're trying something different, where we're releasing, again, 30-minute episodes, free, ad-supported first to the consumer on YouTube, which is where the audience is. And then a binge model where if you want to watch them all at once, as opposed to waiting for the weekly episodic release, you can pay for it on an EST model. We're using Vimeo, iTunes, Google Play. It's pretty much anywhere you want to download something, or whatever your consumer habits are, you can buy it. TBD how that all works. Netflix took seasons 1 and seasons 2 as a license and made it a television show. But the key is, we're tapping into all of it, trying to figure out the best business model. And I think some of the unbundling are not going to just be about subscription. I think there's still going to be dual revenue models where CBS will probably still have advertising on their unbundled, package along with a subscription fee. HBO may not, but others will. And so it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
I mean, when I have to sit through an advertisement in a movie theater where I bought the ticket, it always ticks me off. It's just a very, sensitive point for me personally. But I do think that the producers and the brands and the networks are all having to experiment, and it's the Wild West. The consumer, in trying to follow the consumer who wants it, when they want it, how they want it, and as often as they want it, is a very daunting kind of proposal for a content creator. So what I want to talk about is the power of the user, and I want to talk a little bit about something that I love, which is the data that gets generated from the playback, the serving and the playback and the creation of these shows. And something really interesting that I'm not sure everybody knows about is that platforms like, let's say, Netflix are running a lot of older television shows where they have rabid fans who their love for these shows is actually causing some shows to be greenlit again 10 or 20 years after they were made in new forms. And so the use data, the consumption data, is now helping to dictate what gets created, although they've been careful, at least in Netflix case, to talk about how they're not interfering in the writer's room. But I think the checkbook is a very powerful tool in terms of interference. So why don't we talk a little bit about consumer data, who gets to collect it and control it and negotiate with it? To anybody.
Well, we have an interesting thing in the sense that we do dynamic ad insertion, and in the cable world, Freewheel plays that role. In our world, a little company called LiveRail played that role. And then LiveRail goes and gets bought by a little company called Facebook. And suddenly we can be doing ad insertion based on your Facebook profile on a set, even if the Facebook application is not active. And it gets really creepy to me, to be very honest with you, is who gets to collect the data, because now the buy-side systems of the advertisers are acting for customer ID, i.e. MAC addresses, which means that they can identify directly and do retargeting, but on TV. And I think the biggest issue in the whole industry on the television side of the problem is that basically I think the FCC is going to step in fairly quickly, and you're going to have a huge US privacy problem.
Right.
Because doing it on the web is sort of expected. Doing it with mom apple pie in the American way called television is an entirely different set of issues.
I mean,
do you think that people will see? I mean, I don't see any difference between the iPhone 6 Plus and a plasma TV that's 60 inches. I mean, I don't know
But
whether
did
those
you see the
distinctions.
Attorney General come out and sort of talking about that both Google and Apple were being un-American by not giving them back doors to subpoenas? I mean, there's some really big issues cropping up here.
Right, and if you just think about it in terms of what ad is being served to who, when you hit the television living room where you're serving that particular ad to a group of people, then it could be kind of embarrassing if it's based on my viewing habits, and all of a sudden my mom's in
Here's the point for programmers: gross rating points doesn't matter if the ad insertion system is aggregating the audience. Because now you can buy the ad system across all these fragmented things, and the data side, the buy side of the equation, and the data systems now can aggregate the audience. And if they can track the user, then it commoditizes the programmer side of the business, and you have a tough time getting paid for what you do.
Oh, well, let's not go there.
Well, the other problem
It's
is
tough enough.
Yeah.
Well, the other problem is, not just who's collecting the data, but it's how is it getting interpreted and how is it getting standardized is still a very difficult thing in at least my side of the business, which is content creation for brands and how we charge for it and how we get paid. So, for example, Nielsen has been, sort of owns the television business, right? Everybody understands that Nielsen is a flawed system for many reasons. The rating is very, very sort of suspect these days, right? But it is still an accepted currency on how media is bought and sold on television. We don't have a version of that today in digital media. So what is a view? Is it someone that watches the whole thing? What is a view on YouTube as compared to a view on your own website? Is there a way to measure engagement? What is a like? What is a share? What is this? And how does that all roll up into a number that is then accepted across I don't know if it's the IAB, but media buyers as a way to measure and buy media and or brand integration in this ecosystem.
Yeah, and it's not just what people viewed, but what they did. So I would say dues instead of views.
Well, at the moment, though, what they're calculating is what's been served as opposed to what's been viewed. But I do think that the IAB is trying to find a path through this. There's a whole bunch of discussions.
But how did they know that you turned your neck and didn't look at the ad when it was served up on that intelligent television? So again, this goes back to how you recapture attention. A lot of people think it's a second screen and that you have some kind of synchronized experience.
But that's only in regard to media, to your point, right? Mm-hmm. That's pre-roll. That's something that was served, tagged, aggregated, et cetera, which again is still difficult to sort of, measure. But then there's all the other things that we've been talking about, which is the brand integration and the custom content piece that doesn't necessarily have a media component or something that was served, but rather a YouTube star or celebrity on a video saying, "Hey, check out my new Samsung phone." And what does the viewership of that content mean? Hard to track.
But hold on. That's not. I mean, that really isn't. I mean, we don't have contracts that allow us to say, well, when a thing is viewed, it just counts as a view when they first watch the first 2 seconds, even though your brand integration is at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The brand will demand, just the same as they will anything else, that if somebody hasn't watched until 2 minutes and 30 seconds, they're not charged for it. Doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
you need to go look also at, there's a very interesting gentleman he calls himself the ad contrarian. And look on his website. There's a video about how also all this viewability problem and the spoofing on pre-rolls is occurring.
Yeah.
Watch the video on that site. It's amazing the amount of fraud that's occurring down in non-viewable stuff. And I mean,
below the fold.
substantial,
Right.
really
Yeah,
a large
yeah.
on the website.
It's
the thing
very,
about that
it-
too, guys, because you mentioned the second screen. One thing to just throw out there is what is the second screen today, right? I think the assumption is that this has always been the second screen. If you look at us, and I'm curious about others on this panel, 60% of our views come on mobile devices. So does that mean the TV then is the second screen? And then
I would say.
and then you also have to contemplate how ads are viewed and engaged with on mobile, which is far different than how they're viewed on TV, which is far different than how they're viewed on desktop. So all that factors into how users interact with ads and how the data plays into that.
Do we see any talent, including Vine stars, and they all have their own agencies now and representatives? Do we see the talent who are their own brand in many cases arguing for control over the use data of their product?
I don't really, from our end, it's not so much about control over the data. They have the data for the most part.
Right.
You know, they are the publishers when you think about it. They're the ones that we might have access, depending on your relationship. You might have access to their data. Ultimately, they are the publishers. They have the data. You have a window into it. If you're running third-party analytics or third-party tracking, then you're starting to build your own data pool. But ultimately, they're very aware of their audience. They're very aware of their engagement. They're very aware of the data. We're going through them. I think one of the biggest things you're seeing up here, just for the audience, is the struggles that we're having on a daily basis, trying to, how do you position the content for brands, and how do we position ourselves within the brand community with the data that we have? There's obviously a need for.
So basically, YouTube stars, Vine stars, up and coming talent can, if they leave their publisher or their MCN or whoever's representing them, can take their audience with them. That's pretty powerful.
That's a really interesting thing, because when we worked with Cimarelli this summer, you know, our measuring system for the brand was, all right, well, we're going to have this many views and this, you're going to do a couple of commercials and everything else. Well, when we started to gather data, that's so not my part of it, but I kept hearing everybody say it's changing, not weekly, it's changing daily. That, you know, they'll come up for a meeting and they'll do an Instagram, a tweet, and this. By the time they hit the parking lot, there's 45,000 more impressions than hashtag Subway. So it's like, well, wait, they're everywhere and they control it and they know it and they're a brand. So that's where it starts to get really exciting, because you're not just saying, oh, well, we're going to give you $500 to come out and do a web series, because they're worth so much more than that to a brand. They can put a brand in places that a brand can never go authentically and genuinely.
But
So go ahead, Tom. I want you to respond to that, but I also want you to talk a little bit about what you're doing in terms of this new viewpoint of instead of software as a service, like television.
Can I add one quick thing real quick, just for clarification's sake? You know, and we could debate this, I guess, but the Vine star, the YouTube star, et cetera, it's actually arguably not their audience and not their data. They have the same window that we have. It's YouTube's data and Vine's data. And if YouTube or Vine wanted to turn it off or shut it down or change it or manipulate it, they could. And if you didn't have access to that distribution platform anymore, then your audience, now in theory they're still a fan of yours and will find you somewhere, but that is a debate that, you know, we'll see how that plays out, but they could change that.
Great point, because
Right.
it gets worse as soon as you get off your web browsers. Because right now the YouTube economy is on an open web browser with cookies and tokens and tracking systems and beacons and everything else. That does not work in the world of smart TVs or their devices. There are no cookies and tokens and beacons on a Samsung or LG smart TV. They control a lot of the user interface in the player. In fact, there's not even open web browsers in a lot of these devices.
Not very
So
smart,
as soon as you go into syndication of moving this programming onto other platforms, other people, like you said that YouTube controls the data. You move on to Samsung, Samsung attempts to control the data. You know that Samsung has an ad sales team in New York? Roku is actually building a syndicated ad sales team. They're not asking for percentage of gross revenue when you get on their platform. They're asking for a percentage of your ads, because they're moving to a more cable-like model. So the problem is syndicating your programming. As soon as you move out of open web browser, the game changes entirely. So I come out of the online world. I thought it was going to be real easy. I mean, I work for a company called Move Networks, ABC.com. This show brought to you with limited commercial options by ABC. We invented that. And we said, okay, we can do that. We can move it across all these different platforms. As soon as you go on the smart TVs, you can't take your player. You can't take your syndicated player and stick it on a TV. They don't allow it. There's a QA process that goes through Suwon, South Korea. So the world changes as you move out of the open web browser, where the YouTube economy, where it does have YouTube in control of the data, it's going to get a lot worse. So the industry's got a huge, it's like Web 1.0 had some major problems, and there wasn't until it took us 5 or 6 years to work through that process. We're in OTT 0.3, not even 1.0. So
that's an opportunity, folks. That shouldn't be daunting.
So the television as a service idea, task, is the idea that syndicating on a lot of these platforms is not the same as open browser world. And if you want to go there to get to the bigger screens, it's going to be a very different world. So figuring out how to syndicate and scale your audience, still tie into your ad system. So you want to come back in because you want to be able to roll it up, keep control of your data. Excuse me, that's a bitch of a problem. I'm sorry. You think it's easy? Try going on any one of those app-based devices that's not an open web browser.
Right.
And then give me a call, because it's hard.
So I want to open this up to the audience for some questions. Do we have some questions here for this great panel? Yes, in the back. Can you speak loudly and say your name and who you're with?
Hi, Marcel and Frankie, myself. Sound Lorraine production. Have series producers started to also produce advertising content, or have advertisers or the companies that want to place products, are they still sort of insisting on signing off on that? Or,
creative control for the advertisers?
Yeah, are creators, do they have some leeway?
On our platform, the creators have approval. So nothing can get done without a creator approving it. Yeah. And I'll tell you why. It's because it's impossible for us to always know what the context is. Like if you put a bottle of Jack Daniels on a breakfast table and you're on ABC Family, probably not so good. And yet, if you did the same thing for an episode of Breaking Bad, it would be perfectly acceptable. So it's really all about what's Eric Schultz. Content is king, but context is the crown. It's absolutely true. So the content creator knows more about the show than anybody else does. So.
Yeah, the way that we look at it is a content creator, a channel creator is ultimately the editor-in-chief of their publication. And they're not going to let someone else have final creative control over what goes on. Their homepage, their centerpiece, whatever you want to call it, their feature of the day. They're going to want to have ultimate say in that, because at the end of the day, it's their audience, and
it's their audience, and they're protecting their audience and leading their audience. And if they don't have an audience, they don't have a brand.
And it all goes back to authenticity as well. But did you ask as well about is the creator creating a spot for the brand? Was that part of your question?
Either, yeah, like the pre-roll or in the scene.
See, in the perfect world, isn't it the same? I mean, if the world works as it should do, and we talk about disrupting barriers, there's not that big distinction. The content is absolutely beautifully integrated into the brand, or the brand is beautifully integrated with the content. And as far as the person is concerned, they don't care. Because it's right and the context is right, they don't care, because the show itself is either great or not.
But
yeah,
so that's a really tough one. I'm going to just jump in there. Like, I've seen the result of creativity by committee, right? Which is what happens when you have too many people who get to own the perspective. And so what happens is that show might get really watered down. Done really well, done in a balanced way, you might be able to achieve that, right? But there's something to be said about the way the Hollywood industry came up to vest that creative control in the writer, in the producer, in the musician, rather than having somebody else like pulling the puppet strings, because what you end up with is something that it comes off overproduced and and won't garner an audience.
The control should be with the content owner or the content creator. I totally agree. What I'm saying is that for the user, how the user parses it in their head. Oh, is this a is this, well, it's sort of an ad because I can see the Cadillac in it, but it's a great show. And I know that it has to be paid for somehow. So fine. You know, like, so that's I don't know whether it.
Yeah.
Here's an important.
At the end of the day,
Simple thinking.
I think part of it is you realize that the brand or the partner has come to you to work with you because they like you, they trust you, the same way that your audience does. You know, they like your audience, they like your style, they like your voice. And so at the end of the day, as the creator, as the gardener of your brand, that's an important part of the discussion. Now, again, there's got to be some meat in the middle. There's got to be the brand themes and initiatives have to be part of what you do. But I think at the end of the day, when you look at what you create, it's at its core, if it's on your platform, if it's on your creator's platform, part of why that partner came to you is because you've done a great job at amassing that audience, at driving engagement.
Do I have another question? Yeah.
Yes, I like Ranji. We're in the live streaming space, so we get tremendous audience engagement. So I'm looking at instant ad insertions and the ability to feed back the demographics to alter that equation. If anybody.
Yeah, I worked on ESPN3 when Disney was first looking at dynamic ad insertion in live events. And that's the worst use case ever invented in the history of mankind. You have a very interesting challenge. Because how do you know where the breaks are? How do you know how to get it in there? How do you tie into either some of the new, how do you tie into an ad system where that cash flow is coming? And then how do you track it on a live event? My question for you is, why does your product have to be exactly live? What's close enough? Is 7 seconds, 10 seconds, what's live? Are they watching your programming someplace else and you're in China? Damn.
That's a whole nother set.
Yeah, really. I have no idea what you're talking about, sir.
So we could have a whole panel on
That one's a
censorship,
tough
and
one.
not just censorship in China, but really what does it mean to have a point of view online? And if you have a channel who becomes over-identified with one point of view, then we're dealing with all sorts of strange issues in terms of access alone, and only certain people can get above the noise. That's a form of censorship as well.
Yeah,
This is live streamed, isn't it? And I just want to say that this is a massive, massive brand integration opportunity gone to waste.
That was so you guys could have a pure, unadulterated point of view.
When I moved
Well,
over
we were more into the money.
Of course. So wait, hang on. Let's see if there's any other questions. Yes.
My name is Don Goldman. I'm with Visual Unity. We're a tech company that provides SaaS and PaaS for OTTs. Tom, you touched on OTT. We're not even at 1.0 yet.
Yeah.
And of course, you got the big guys out there like Netflix and Amazon delivering on terrific content. What about the tier 2 content owners? How are they going to overcome some of their skittishness to get into this business? Promote their product to get the advertiser to bring eyeballs to them?
That's a great question. And the hardest part on a lot of these platforms, like even Roku, I mean, you heard great stories about Roku. There's now 1,800 apps on Roku. 4 apps generate 95% of the revenue on Roku: Pandora, Amazon Prime, Hulu Plus, and Netflix. And then throw in the new HBO and maybe CBS and you're done. So how do you get any kind of discovery and, quite frankly, viewership on some of these platforms? It's really tough.
I mean, just to give you a really frightening statistic, I think it's less than 1 app is downloaded per customer on smartphones.
Yeah,
So
and 93%
less than 1 app.
abandonment
How are you going to
rate.
get to be that less than 1 app?
Yeah. So here's where it's getting kind of intriguing. Apple TV, if you look at it, didn't follow that model. It's very, very scarce. And they go to a slotting model where they're actually building brands that you expect, and therefore the quality of the programming is there. This year's CES, you'll see at least one CE company abandon their app store. I think the television app stores are dying. I think they're already DOA. What's going to replace it? Slotting and multi-channel. Known brands, known programming. You bring it home, you turn it on, it says, do you want to watch these things? Which channels do you want? And whether they're part of a paid bundle or a free litany of things in your UI. The average consumer watches 15 television channels out of 500. That means 93% of the things they pay for, they don't watch. I would love to bundle a service for you that was 50% utilization. Didn't have to be 100%, but 50%.
So you think CBS will go outside of their own content, outside of the distribution deals?
As a great question. Everybody, goes, oh, the HBO deal, the HBO deal. The CBS deal is more important. And the Dish deal with Disney for ESPN. Those are the two I'd be paying attention to.
I would if I was them. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you try and cast the net, whole new paradigm?
Yeah.
We have time for one more question. All right, so we don't have another question. we've stunned you all. So I'm just going to go down the line on the panel and let you guys wrap up. Keep it brief because we really only have about a minute or two. Coda, why don't we start with you because you're there on the end.
Yeah. What are we wrapping up?
Whatever you want to say to these people. Give your best advice to our audience in terms of broadcasting without borders and where to focus.
So I think it's going to be, we're in a really interesting time right now where you have just an entire generation of creators coming up with enormous power in their pocket. And you're dealing with new formats and audiences that are growing up without cable. We used to talk about cord cutters. We talk about cord nevers now. And it's really fascinating to see the impact that a cord never, just what they're growing up with without cable. Their parents are parenting differently. Families have a different dynamic. Content is taking on a whole new meaning, and it's becoming more of a community around content. I guess it always has been a community, but now that community has a voice. They can interact with the creators. They interact with the channels. Imagine what it was like if you could interact with Jerry Seinfeld every Thursday when he was doing Seinfeld. This is the world that creators are living in today and that consumers are living in today. And I think it's really important to go in with an open mind because what we're challenged with is a traditional way of thinking coming in and trying to impose and enforce their old understanding on consumers and creators. And it's a very delicate environment today that we're trying to navigate through collectively, and we're learning collectively.
Tom?
Passion and personality. If you're going to create content, own your vertical market, do it with, as they were talking about, honesty, transparency. I believe in Howard Stern. I believe in that personality.
Shock value.
Absolutely. But I also, but the personality knows their segment. They know their vertical market, because this is all about, this isn't about building a new sports competitor to ESPN. That's big bucks. This is about reestablishing vertical markets that the consumer's really passionate about and establishing credibility and scale, and then figure out how to scale the business, because it's going to be fragmented for many, many years.
Peter?
I think the most interesting phone call we got in the last 6 months was Procter & Gamble, who produces probably more commercials than anybody on the planet. And they called and said, what we've been doing for the last 50 years, we're going to stop doing. Not across the board, because they're still going to do big marquee commercials, and they're going to spend $1 million, $2 million for a certain commercial. But what they've learned and what they see from all of us up here is, if you have a pot of money and you have a brand, that there are so many things you can do with that money. You can, and if you move away from a television commercial model to a television production model, the world's your oyster, and there's so much you can do with that money, and so much content you can create, and at the end of the day, tell great stories.
Dan?
I'd say this is a different, medium that we're working with now, and the rules and the tactics for operating in this ecosystem are different than that of television, from production to advertising to engagement to everything. And you cannot try to fit what we're doing now into a model, like television. You've got to reinvent sort of how we're operating in this space. Producing television shows for web doesn't work. Advertising like you would on television in this ecosystem doesn't work. And trying to adhere to sort of the old guard to try and grab the opportunity or the dollars won't work either.
Warren?
I opened up by talking about discovery and scripts and how we think that same opportunity exists, but it's a different platform now. 3 words that we use a lot at Tastemade: global, mobile, social. Global in that never before could you get content out globally the way that you can today, and there's a giant global audience that is craving content. And so what Tastemade is doing is fitting a real need all around the world. Mobile, 60% of our views are on these devices. Keep that in mind across all content you create, but also what Tastemade is doing, as I mentioned, is empowering people to use their mobile devices to create content and share it with their friends and share it with the world. And then social. You got to create content that people want to engage with and want to share. We always talk about how do we create something that connects with people, that gives them that aha moment, that educates them, that inspires them, that gets them to click that share button and share it with their friends and share it with their family. So global, mobile, social, all that we think is key.
Great. Ted, you got the last word.
Oh dear. Be afraid. I think that there has never been a more exciting time to be a content creator. If you want to tell stories and reach people, there's never been a better time to do that in history. The downside of that is I think it's going to lead to a very, very fragmented market, which is, again, okay as long as you find your affinities and that's great. The problem is making money out of fragmentation is very difficult for an advertiser. So there will be more companies like Myriad that actually act as the flywheel between a fragmented content system and a mass market advertising system. Because what advertisers want is mass eyeballs. And they'll pay for niches, certainly, but that doesn't scale. You're stuck in the sort of kids table. If you want to feed and feast on the, in the real media budgets, you have to provide them with an aggregated audience that makes sense to them. And that can only happen post-production. It can't happen while you're doing it. It's not possible. So there will be more technological solutions to actually creating that kind of liquidity in a marketplace that desperately needs it, because otherwise, if content creators can't monetize their content effectively, they can't make the content, and we're the audience is the one that suffers.
So I'd like you to all join me in thanking this wonderful panel, and they'll be up for a few minutes to talk to you. Thank you, guys.
No, it's good. We like it, watch it.
Great job, guys.
Awesome.